Hi, I am Nuria Pelechano and I'm presenting Stretch Your Reach, studying self-avatar and controller misalignment in virtual reality interaction by José Luis Ponton, Reza Keshavarz, Alejandro Beacco, and myself. The motivation behind this work is that immersive virtual reality typically requires a head-mounted display to visualize the environment and handheld controllers to interact with the virtual objects. Many applications display full-body avatars to represent the user and animate the arms to follow the controllers with inverse kinematics. Ideally, we would like to have a good positioning of the end effectors, which can be the controllers or the avatar's hands. However, having a full-body self-avatar following the user's movement can be challenging due to the discrepancies between the virtual and the user's body, which can lead to misalignments in the hand position that can be noticeable when interacting with virtual objects. This is due to mismatches on the avatar dimensions, the joint locations, the total number of joints of the skeleton of the avatar with respect to a real human, and the possible range of movements. Related work has studied how discrepancies can be actually introduced to achieve several goals by modifying self-body image. For example, virtual hand discrepancies have been induced to improve ergonomics or the feeling of weight in a virtual object. Full-body discrepancies have been used to respect physical collisions with virtual objects and enhance embodiment. And Kelnetti et al. Studied to what extent you could stretch the body arm of the user and still hold the illusion of body ownership, but the user simply had to rest the arm on a table, but there was no interaction or manipulation of objects. So, we know that discrepancies can be induced to modify self-body image and yet achieve embodiment by respecting multisensory consistency. However, when interacting with virtual objects, often inconsistencies may appear that break the visuo-haptic or visuo-proprioceptive feedback. In our work, we're interested in studying not only embodiment under different interaction methods, but also proprioception, accuracy, and task performance. Therefore, our research questions focus on how rendering the controllers, the accuracy on the controller's location, and whether we attach the virtual controller to the virtual hand can have an impact on embodiment, proprioception, and performance during virtual object manipulation. In this paper, we propose 5 different interaction modes to allow the user to interact with virtual objects and study their influence on embodiment, proprioception, preference, and task performance. In the free controller mode, the controller is rendered in its real position, and it might appear to fly away when the avatar's arm is shorter than the user's arm and the user tries to reach for faraway locations. This introduces visuo-tactile conflicts and also visuo-proprioceptive conflicts. In the attached controller mode, the controller is rendered always attached to the user's virtual hand, even when the avatar's arm is shorter than the user's arm. So there might be an offset between the virtual and the real controller location. This respects visuo-tactile cues, and it doesn't introduce visual artifacts as the user always sees the controller in his hand. However, it might introduce a visuo-proprioceptive conflict. In the hand mode, the controller is not rendered, and thus the virtual hand reach will depend on the avatar's arm length. This introduces visuo-proprioceptive conflicts and visuo-tactile conflicts. However, it doesn't introduce visual artifacts since the user will not notice if the controller is moving away from his virtual hand. In the stretch controller mode, the controller is rendered and the arms stretch to always match the position of the virtual and real hands, thus allowing holding the virtual controller at all times. This provides body continuity. It also accurately matches visuo-tactile cues and visuo-proprioceptive cues. However, there might be skinning artifacts introduced when stretching the arm. And finally, in the stretch hand mode, the user will always observe the same stretching behavior as before, but without the rendering of the controller. This mode guarantees body continuity, also visu-proprioceptive cues being consistent. However, it introduces visu-tactile conflicts as the user cannot see the controller but it feels it in his hand, and it also introduces skinning artifacts when stretching the arm. Our study first goes through a calibration step where we apply a uniform scaling to match the user height and calibrate the controllers with respect to the avatar's joint. Then, the participant experiences 3 interaction tasks followed by an embodiment questionnaire. The cube task consists of reaching, grabbing, and rotating the virtual object to position it accurately and requires mostly careful and slow movements. The cannon task consists of reaching for balls flying fast against the user and requires dynamic and fast movements without much precision. And finally, the painting task is about drawing shapes on a virtual blackboard and requires slow, precise movements, mostly easy to reach. The embodiment questionnaire was based on the work by Peck and González Franco, in which they propose 4 embodiment components: appearance, response, ownership, and multisensory. We selected a subset of 6 questions to suit the specific needs of our experiment, with the aim of avoiding participants' fatigue considering the duration of the experiment. While the chosen questions covered all the proposed 4 components of the sense of embodiment, they were particularly focused on those highly influencing ownership and multisensory aspects, such as questions regarding movement, touch, and location. This stage of tasks followed by an embodiment questionnaire is repeated 5 times, one for each interaction mode. Then there was a question with only yes or no answers for each mode to ask the participant whether they thought that their real hands were in the position of their virtual hands. And finally, after explaining to the participants each of the interaction modes, they could play with a virtual watch to change between interaction modes and answer questions regarding their preference. The questions being how much did they like the interaction technique and how easy was to manipulate objects with the interaction technique selected. For the experiments, we had a total of 40 participants with 19 females and 21 males, ages ranging between 18 and 24, and VR experience ratings being 6 high, 3 medium, 18 low, and 14 reported no experience. We had a balanced Latin square design for the ordering of the 5 conditions corresponding to each of the interaction modes. And the 4 critical factors studied were whether we render or not the controllers, attaching the controllers to the hand or letting them free, stretching the arm, and the location of the virtual controller or hand, which was used for studying proprioception. Regarding the results, when it came to embodiment, overall we obtained high results, especially when the arm stretching was activated, which was significantly higher than the 3 other modes. But surprisingly, free controllers resulted higher embodiment than attached controllers or hand modes. Regarding perceived hand location, estimating the correctness of the hand location was higher for the arm stretching mode, followed by attached controllers. So, to some extent, attaching the controllers can fool the user regarding the correct location of their hands. Users had a clear preference for the arm stretching mode, followed by free controllers, because with these 3 modes, they could reach for the farthest away locations without problems. However, with the attached controller or hand modes, there could be situations where they couldn't successfully grab a faraway location, and this could lead to frustration on the user. Yet, attached controllers was preferred over hand. We believe that even though the users could sometimes feel their hands were not in the correct position, the visual tactile feedback provided by attached controllers could sometimes fool the user. When it came to performance results, we observed differences based on the characteristics of the type of task. So for example, for the cube task, which requires slow, accurate movements, we had the best performance for the stretching arm modes, followed by the free controllers. In the other two modes, the lack of correctness in the position of the virtual hand introduced a proprioceptive incongruence, making it harder and more time-consuming for the users to complete the task. However, in the cannonball, which requires fast dynamic movements, where the users are mostly focusing on the balls and not so much looking at the hands of the controllers, we observed that there were hardly any differences between the interaction modes. And finally, for the painting task, which requires precise movement within easy-to-reach locations, the users could hardly notice misalignments, but for the few occasions when the distance was a bit farther away and the misalignments occurred, we observed that the worst performance results were for the free controller mode. So, in conclusions, we observed the best results for the stretching modes. The stretching mode offers a good end effector location and respects body continuity. We have correct multisensory feedback, visual proprioceptive, and for the case of the stretch controller, we also have visual tactile feedback. The skinning artifacts that might appear when stretching the arm did not affect the user experience. When it came to rendering, the controllers does not appear to have an impact, although the user loses the visual tactile feedback. And finally, attaching the controllers to the hand might induce a proprioceptive drift due to the consistent visual tactile feedback. So it might be a good solution when precise interaction is not needed. Thanks for listening, and if you need more details, you can find them in the paper.